Okay. I think we're all set up here. I think it's time. Want to thank you all for the delay. Might be seeing some of, working out some technical issues. I'm Ross Angola.
And I'm Jenna, and welcome to
People Talking Kali. And if this is your first time tuning in, basically we are here to bring the Kali community together to have a live discussion with featured guests to talk about all things related to Kali and Eskrima in general, as well as Pakiti Tirshi Kali specifically. So welcome, thank you for your patience, and thank you for tuning in. We got a very special guest here for our first kickoff People Talking Kali Season 2. Mandala Lamont Glass is with us. He was actually supposed to be a guest on our first season, and just through scheduling and time constraints, we had to postpone it, but we're honored to have him here to help kick us off with our Season 2. Mandala Lamont Glass, welcome, good brother.
Thank you. Great to be here.
How you feeling, sir? How's everything?
Things are going good, as you can in current situations. Aside from a very cranky 3-year-old right now, things are pretty good.
Yeah, and first and foremost, man, I definitely want to do a status check, see how everything's going. And you're in Washington, correct?
Yep, Eastern Washington.
Eastern Washington, and you sound good. You got your family good and everything secure in your area?
Yeah, we're really lucky where we are. Sort of low incidence. I mean, everybody's sort of staying home, but and the area is pretty low incidences of COVID. So we're in a pretty good situation.
Oh, that sounds good. How's the group going? How are you guys maintaining your cohesiveness, collaboration?
We've been honestly, it's been pretty quiet. Most people are just sort of hunkered down. A couple of us have sort of run, sort of on our own workouts. We're doing some talking back and forth. I posted a couple of training vids, but we've got a lot of stuff sort of already back in sort of existing training logs. They're kind of hidden away on private YouTube channels and whatnot that, just, refer back to basics and that kind of thing. I put out a little like warm-up video last week, and then I've been putting out some technique video, but mostly in each of these weeks, I'm going to put out another sort of warm-up video. Of course, we can't, actively interact. So much of what a normal class is can't be replicated online.
And how's that working for you? You find that the students are responding? How's that working?
I think it really depends on the people. I've got a mix, 50-50. Half the people are pretty well connected,
Right.
do Facebook, that kind of thing. And the other half are
Right.
kind of don't touch it. And those guys, are going to be harder to contact that way. So,
Yeah.
so they're just sort of harder to link in. It's, if you're on social media, it's relatively easy to suck people in, but, if you're not, you're not. And in that case, it's just, dropping email saying hi, maybe a call once in a while. But
Right.
at the same time, people, despite, maybe being at home, a lot of people in my group are actually healthcare workers. So they're, more than a little stressed out already. And I kind of don't want to bother them, as much as this might be an escape in some ways for them. A lot of them are like dealing with stressful jobs at home and coming home and just, sort of dealing with kids who've been home all day. And I kind of don't want to get in the middle of that. So.
Right. Before we go any further, we just wanted to acknowledge the people who are tuning in, who would love to give you some greetings, Mandala. First, we want to say greetings and thank you for checking in with us, the Citadel Combat Arena, to the Nomad Kali group, of course, MNG Royce and LG Frankie. We want to give a thanks to Mandala, Rich Howe from Florida, and Guru Rolando from Florida from the McKinley's group. And also for, I think that's it. We've got everyone. So everyone's giving you a lot of greetings and wants to send you their regards.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank
right.
you all.
Yeah, and there's another student of mine, Brother Uru, just tuned in. Salute to your students who are on that front line. Brother James Epperly, give him my strength and love. First time I met Mandala Lamont was way back, well, maybe not way back, was in Utah at a PTTA conference. And you were with Brother James, and I believe he's also in the healthcare field.
Yep.
So send him.
He's in surgery every day. So.
You know, and what was interesting first time meeting Lamont, he's got this, you know, he's got this charming smile. He's
Yes.
so nice and laid back. And he picked up a stick and started sparring. And it was this whole other kind of individual came out. He was trying to hurt you. He was trying to get you. And with love, though, with love. But then afterwards was very analytical, very technical. And that was my first impression of you. I was new to Pikiti at that time in terms of like the larger world. But I remember seeing someone who presented himself as very technical and analytical. But when you got in there, you're not afraid to fight and put yourself out there. And so how'd you get started on this journey into PTK?
Well, so I've been long-term martial artist, started when I was 12, you know, and like most people do, and, you know, the community karate studio. And, you know, so I did that for several years. That really gave me actually my foundation. I had a, you know, pretty good, it was an Ichinru karate school, but a pretty good, you know, local school. And, you know, I kind of joke about it because it's, you know, I went to karate, spent several years, formative, like gave me all my foundational movements, stances, all that stuff. Got into high school, went away from it, you know, went into college, tried it for a couple years, but college was a distraction, got out of it. After college, I got back to it. And that's when it finally stuck. But, you know, so I did a lot of different martial arts because of that. Again, years of karate, Ichinru and Goju-Ryu. And then after I got out of college and I started, I was working seasonally. I was trained as a wildlife biologist. And one of the things about wildlife biology is you work seasonally. And so you go to a job for 6 months, you know, spring through summer or something like that. And then you're off for the wintertime. So I had work somewhere and I'd find a martial arts school there and go to that. And then in the wintertime, I'd go back to Seattle and I'd train somewhere there. And so for years, I was bouncing back and forth. So constantly, you know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You know, sort of collectively spent some time in Zone Jiu-Jitsu, some time in Judo, and then eventually got into Kaji Kembo, and then that sort of stuck with me. I moved to Wyoming, not really full-time, but a long-term seasonal job, and there was a Kempo school there. So it was a really good Kempo school, and went there and spent there. That's where I met Mandala Jason Jones. He was, actually, when I showed up there, he was already a black belt, and so he was kind of, you know, my senior older brother in the martial arts at that school. And so I kind of came to that school with kind of an eclectic background already. Ooh, that's a little bit of wind. Is the audio okay?
Yeah,
You get a couple of gusts every now and then.
Okay.
that's okay. You're good.
Okay. And so anyway, so I went to Wyoming and I was still working seasonally. I'd work in Wyoming for 8 months and then go back to Seattle and do something else. And it was during that time that I ran into Filipino martial arts. And I think it was, well, I know exactly when it was. I had heard of it, of course. Kempo has a lot of Polynesian Filipino interactions with it. So I had heard of it, but I hadn't really seen it, hadn't really experienced it. And I was at a used bookstore. I'm kind of a martial arts nerd that way, where I'm constantly picking up books of even martial arts I don't study. And I found it was Dog Brothers Tape 6, Stick versus Other Weapon. It's an hour of Dog Brothers fighting staff and whips and, you know, nunchucks and stuff like that. And so I was like, oh, this is really cool. And so that totally appealed to me. And eventually I convinced, well, it wasn't convincing. He was looking for it too. I got my black belt in Kempo, and we were both looking for weapon work. We were like, our weapon work isn't awesome. It's like, our unarmed good, our weapon work needs some work. And so we were looking for it. And so because I had that background, I'd also picked up I had spent some active study time in Serrata Eskrima. I'd spent a little time in Asano Blend Kali. Not in no way was I instructor level or anything like that. This is like 6 months of private lessons, you know, a year here. So I had a little bit of background in it, but kind of eclectic. And when Mandala Jason and I started, at this time, of course, totally unranked, started looking, trying to get more information. We started going everywhere and pulling what videos there existed. That was the first time I started chasing seminars. I went out to see Master Arms James Keating, who coincidentally I now live 60 miles from, but at the time I was living in Wyoming. So, you know,
Let me pause you right there for a second. because before you go on, I know this feeling, and we cannot underestimate this. And there's a lot of martial artists that know this, where you're like a ship without a harbor. You know you want to train, okay? You know you got the spirit to be a warrior. You're looking for schools. You know your job or your lifestyle is moving you to different locations, so you have to change. And then you arrive at this point where you're kind of like, I'm gonna settle. I kind of know what I want, and I want to settle in and focus in on this. And it sounded like you and Jason were moving towards weaponry after this huge, taking us high school. It culminated into this, like, all right, we know it's a weapons-based thing. All right, kick it off from there.
Yeah,
I just
I
want
don't know that we were that fixed at that point. We only knew that our weapon was weak. Like, our weapon side was weak. I don't know that we were like, oh, we need to be weapon-based, but we need more information. We were still seeking, trying to getting into that world. Coincidentally, that time, literally the same weekend that I was off training with competing, then a probably guru, Jared Wahongi, had brought in Nene Portal, Frantuan Gahe's uncle, who Jared had trained with, to Rock Springs to our Kempo Schools tournament. Another person had brought him into town, but they did a display. So Jason got a link that way. And then, so a couple years later, when we were frustrated at that point, we're like, okay, we've got lots of drills. We were taking home all this stuff, training all these drills, learning about it. And I think we were a year and a half into that. We're like, this is not working. We were both black belt instructors at that point, and we're like, this is just not coming together. And we were, as simplest and both sort of analytical, we're fairly.
That's Lamont's son, by the way. That's his 3-year-old. No, I'm just kidding.
This is my 12-year-old dog. So we're both pretty analytical, and just sort of going through it and sort of figuring out how we would teach this to our Kempo students. And we're like, this is just not working. So Jason remembered, there's Jared Wahongi out of Salt Lake City. And so we called him up, and we'd been training. One of the functional pieces that we'd been using was some of the Dog Brother tapes. We had all the videos there. The fundamentals of Dog Brothers, as shown in the first series of videos, is Eric Noss, and who was a PT, student from early New York days, and he was one of sort of the core founding members. All of those fundamentals on that first series, the first 3 videos, are PT. So when we went to Jared, it was like, okay, everything here's the same. It's not, we in a Sono Blend videos, they're like, okay, swinging a stick, but it's not the same. The footwork's a little bit different. We went to Jared, and it was like, okay, this is the same, right? So same system. And we, both of us, I think, went down, and after and we went down, jumped in a group class, went and grabbed some private lessons, took it home, and we're like, okay, this is a system. This is clearly cohesive in a way that the stuff we had before wasn't. And so that really clicked with us, and that sort of started our journey in Pikiti.
Well, before we go any further, again, you just want to give another shout out to people who are tuning in. Sister Sandra from the McKillies group as well. Some more love from Guru Rolando. Squatting Bear, is that?
No, Squatting Bear is Teresa.
Oh, exactly. Okay. Great to see you, Teresa. Hope all is well. We have
Chris Monzigma from
PTTA Canada.
Right.
We have Brother Robert Daly, and we have Brother Ali Johnson from Chicago. And you have your first question posed. But
before you ask the question, ask the question. Wait, before you ask the question, let me set it up though. Okay. And I was getting to it, and thank you, Morgan, for posing it. Since that time, Lamont, I know you've gotten a lot of live stick sparring matches with a lot of different weapons. We're going to talk about that, but you also actually do cutting tournaments where you're practicing perfecting a cut with the live blade. And so your first question from Morgan is related to that.
And it literally reads, Lamont, how has actual cutting changed the way you train, or has it validated long time training? It's not just something that you find in FMA.
So totally coincidentally, and so Morgan, I think was there the first time I cut in sort of recent times, but I, before, again, dabbling in a lot of different arts over time, I've done a couple seminars with some actually fairly well-known cutting instructors coming from the Japanese martial arts, using a katana. And I'm totally blanking on his name right now. Russell McCartney, I'm not sure what his title is, but he, at one point, he was a Guinness Book World Record holder of, like most consecutive cuts or something like that. And so I had taken actually a couple seminars with him, as had Jason, as had our tempo instructor. And so I learned about blade work and cutting from the Japanese perspective. And then when we got into the Filipino side of things, it was like, well, naturally, you carry that over. You should be able to cut. If you're going to say you're a blade-based art, you should be able to cut. So we just brought that over. One of the traditional cutting mediums in Japanese martial art is tatami mats, which is a rice straw bale that it was literally a floor mat. And then when they're old and soiled, you threw them away. Well, they became a practice cutting medium from literally the days of the samurai for test cutting. And some really informative stuff you can do out of that. If you don't have tatami, those straw beach mats are basically the same thing. And Jason, I remember distinctly, we were down in Salt Lake City, and I think we had trained with Jared, and we ran into Big Lots, and each bought like 24 of the those beach mats a piece, to take home for cutting targets, because they were like $1 a piece or something like that. And to me, you have to be able to cut, right? I mean, if you're going to say you do a blade-based art, you need to be able to cut. Using any number of targets is important. If you don't come up in a blade culture where you're using that normally, in the Philippines, if you come from, not even in the Philippines, if you come from, a place where you're using a machete or equivalent bolo regularly, this isn't training you need. You're going to get that inherently. If you work as a sugarcane cutter, you don't need this training. If you're me, who doesn't have that background, you need to train to cut. And so to me, that's a really important part of it. And so it's an element of training that's really informative. For fun, we'll cut water bottles, but I mean, I posted yesterday, my 7-year-old with no training whatsoever can cut a water bottle. That doesn't take a lot of skill. And my older son is out there, he did 5 consecutive cuts on a water bottle without knocking it off the stand. And he was just relying on his baseball background. So wow. Cutting a water bottle isn't difficult. A lot of people do it for fun. There is informative stuff you can do it, but using cut for mediums is really informative. And so that will teach you, am I shanking my cut? I distinctly remember on my second cutting seminar with Russell McCartney, I was rusty. I hadn't done it since however long it had been since the first seminar. And I was the first guy to cut. And I remember him walking out behind me, and I'm getting ready to cut. I'm using a katana, professionally sharpened. I've got 2 hands, right? And this is a piece of straw bale this big around. This is not a difficult target. I would expect a competent person who has a one-handed sword to be able to cut through it. He walked behind me and was letting everybody in that was watching me know that I was going to shank this cut merely by the way I was holding my sword. Because my positioning was wrong. He knew I was going to cut and turn into that target. Where if that was a water bottle, there would have been no feedback. I would have cut it. Maybe we said it's sailing, but this was a piece of tatami and it has resistance. And so sure enough, I shank it. The stand falls over. My tatami hit the floor. I damn near dropped the sword. That's bad, right? So you need cutting experience with other mediums besides water bottles. And again, if you're cutting in the real world, again, I've cut corn. I'll clear my garden, and just to get the experience. And again, if you come with that background, you don't need this training. Most of us don't have that background, right? Just that cultural background of using a live blade that way.
Right.
And that's
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you because You know, as someone who, number one, we'll get to your kids soon. That's awesome. But when it comes to, it's not just like knowing how to cut. It's like having the audaciousness, the confidence, because, you know, I teach a women's class called Caliente. And one of the most, and these are women, and most women learn how to cut before men do. We learn how to, you know, cut vegetables. And so we're actually more proficient with the knife, and I tend to specialize in knife in the class because I know they'll enjoy a little bit more. And then also, you know, a stick requires more power. And so with the blade, it gives them the feeling of the true, you know, equilibrium of, you know, fighting, you know, against someone who's different from them. But I noticed that every time someone who's new is learning how to use a knife, and most women who have never learned martial, you know, combat science, you know, they're afraid to make their blade actually face their partner, whoever they're training with, actually face the vital point. And you're like, well, what do you think, how do you think is gonna happen? How do you think your person's gonna stop somebody? And you have to be ready to cut. And so I spend usually the first 20 minutes just desensitizing them to the fact that in order to defend yourself, you have to be willing to, you know, have that confidence. So I see there's such an important value in, you know, not only knowing how to cut, but practicing against something that's going to give you feedback similar to a person.
Yeah.
So,
Ali Johnson from Chicago. Hope you're doing safe out there. He had a question similar to what I was going to ask you. His question is, what is the most difficult part, I guess, to learn how to cut properly? And I guess sounds like it's two-part. How do you cut properly? What's the most difficult part to learn? And it was similar to my question in terms of, for us who train PTK, what are some common errors that we may be making in our training that if we actually had to cut live, it just wouldn't, you know, it wouldn't go the way we might think it would go?
So obviously, if you had to say one thing, it's blade alignment. That, you know, that bar none. If you don't have good blade alignment, you think you're swinging well. Maybe you just have been training with a stick so long that you really haven't gotten the understanding of, just because you can screw this up, right? It takes nothing to misposition your hand that nobody's ever going to see. I mean, those knuckle is like, yes, I want my knuckle alignment to be forward, but you can, it's 3 degrees off, and instructor can't see it, right? So that's the single biggest one. One of the tools that I use, I have these, I have a number, when I started, I actually had these little toy pirate swords that you'd swing them, but they had an edge on it, and you would hear a whistle if you're on alignment, and you hear a whoosh if you're off alignment. And that was an easy auditory thing. You could hear, you talk about when you turn over your blade, you would hear whistle, whoosh, and so there's immediate auditory feedback about, oh no, you're turning this over right in the middle of your cut, and so that wasn't, and now I've got steel blades that will do that as well. But at the time it was like these little pirate swords, but they had this great auditory feedback, and people would be like, oh, on, off, on, off. I did training actually at one point, and it's no different with, sort of real swords. And actually, like Japanese swords have the blood groove. It's a fuller or a boki in the Japanese terminology in their training swords purposely because it increases that whistle. That whistle is called tachikaze, literally the sword wind. And so you're listening for that, when you're on, oh, and then I'm off. As long as you're through your cut, in your practice that, what's going on with that. And so that you can do that totally solo. You don't need a target. It will always let you know when you're on. And if you had to pick one thing, it's blade alignment, because without blade alignment, you're going to shank it or it's going to turn in the cut. So that's the single most important thing, because there's a lot of different ways to cut. I can cut with a cast, right? I can cut sort of PD style with a 90-degree, wrist principle. There's lots of different ways to cut. But if you don't have edge alignment, you're not going to get the cut, or you're not going to have a good cut.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Was it difficult to transfer from a two-handed style of cutting to now, Filipino martial arts is primarily?
No, what the funny thing on that is actually everything was the same. Literally the way I was taught with the katana was, I would, hold it like this. I don't have a training blade, but I'd hold the weapon this way and I'd literally point at the target. A relaxed forward grip. Well, what does that look like? Right? This is no different than the L finger, the stupid poly finger out there, right? That That is exactly what we train. It's that's the same thing about keeping wrist flexibility. Now, Japanese cast, yes, it's a dog. Oh, it's a kid. And so, but it's exactly the same thing. And so there was no adjustment when it went to single weapon. Everything of the mechanic wise was the same. Again, how to cut was a little different. But you think I'm inside? Thank you.
Can I put him in the cage?
No, put him inside. And so, no, mechanical wise, again, our 90-degree principle is different, but everything else is the same.
Okay. And I actually was in my mind when I was asking the question, I was thinking about, which I kind of know the answer, but I just wanted you to expound on it. Some would think that because there's one hand on the weapon versus two, making a clean cut. Hey, what's going on, young prince? All right, good to see that young king right there. All right, wow, man, that's beautiful. You know, we love the youth. Jen and I, you know, we're into education and the youth. They don't bother us. Kids crying does not bother us, which is kind of strange. But anyway, I see him back there. I guess, you know, the question being with one hand and you had to make a clean cut through flesh and bone or a tatami mat, is there a difference in the kind of power that you have with one hand versus two?
Sure, you can generate more power in a shorter amount of time with two hands, right? That's just a given. You know, it's just like sabbat, right? When you have two hands, you can push pull, really generate your power faster. So that's absolutely true. But the mechanics, again, that edge alignment's the same, but that's more application of cutting than it is sort of your principles of cutting.
Yeah, it always comes back to technique. One of our students, Rachel, tuned in. What's going on, Rachel? And Tuhan Jack also is saying hi. And what's funny is he typed in "Hey Ross" and they auto corrected it to "Hey Dad," you know. And then he got, you know, a lot of. I'm a father to many, Tuhan Jack. So you know, but you're my senior, sir. So it's good to see you. Morgan has another question over there.
Yes, I think it's more of a he wants to know if you have a similar experience in it. Did you hear the blade whistle in our steel blade fight at Tipon?
Were you able to hear the blade whistling at the Tipon match? If I pronounced it wrong, forgive me.
At that time, usually when I have someone in front of me, I'm not listening for it. But
he said he could. He said he heard it.
You know,
Yeah, okay.
for all my 70s babies out there, this is like some lone wolf and cub stuff, katanas whistling through the air. And we got another question for you though, Mandala.
Yes, I think this is LG Frankie, and it says, "Hi Mandala, is there anything that you would recommend to buy and put together to make a training target to practice multiple cuts on?"
So for cutting itself, no. I use targets for impact practice, and that's a good one. In terms of a cutting medium, you usually have to cut something, right? That's kind of the given off of that. So once you're looking at actually cutting something, I'd recommend, you know, if you have a newspaper anymore, rolled up wet newspaper is a target. You know, water bottles are a target. Cardboard is a target. And it'll tell you a lot about what's going on that way. Hey, Kate. Thank you.
Can I go?
Yeah.
Over there. Yeah. So yeah, so you can, lots of people make backyard cutting a fun pastime. You know, they do it for hobby work. So there's any number of things. If you need a stand, anything will work, you know, but it depends on what you're cutting. One cutting medium that we'll use is actually clay for a harder medium, and that's reusable at least for like one day. You can buy on, you know, I think I got it on Amazon, but you can buy 20 pounds of clay for $20 and you cut it and you can reform it and cut it again. And that's a medium that was used in Russia because they didn't have straw mats, or that wasn't really a cultural thing, but that was used. You don't even need a sharp blade for that. You can use a relatively dull blade or even a trainer with no edge at all, and still cut that way because it's all about edge alignment on clay. You don't need a sharp edge on that one, and you wouldn't want to use a sharp blade. It would kill your edge on a sharp blade anyway. You're literally cutting through sediment. So
You know, and just to add to that, well, it's actually a comment / question. You know, we like to recommend our students to practice thrusting, especially with their short blade, because you know you could just take a trainer and hit a tire 1 or 2 times, and then you know if you've done it, you realize what that feels like, the impact, the grip, and so you know. Just if you can expound on practicing thrusting either with a short and a long blade, what's your experiences? How could you do that safely so you don't maybe injure yourself or injure your training tool? I have my ideas, but I want to learn. We're all here to learn.
Yeah, so the one great simple drill that you can do is either cut out a circle or something about the size of a business card and a piece of cardboard, and it's a partner drill. And you hold it up, and the partner has to put their blade tip perpendicular through the target, right? So it becomes a focus mitt, right? So if my target is here and my hole is this way, and you're standing in front of me, your hooking thrust has to hit at the right angle. And it gives you a small circle to go through, a circle or a square, it doesn't matter, obviously, but it gives you a small target to have to force you to understand what the relationship between the tip of your blade is. Obviously, if you're just doing straight thrusting and the target is always presented this way, that's relatively straightforward. There's a hole that you're just arc. As soon as you arc it like this, and now your thrust has to come in an angle, that's a very different relationship, and that becomes a much more difficult piece about training that, you know. And so because we've now added that third part of the limb that you're not nowhere near as used to. I mean, we understand the alignment between forearm and finger and point, and we can go straight relatively easily. As soon as you add that third joint on, and you are going around the corner, that becomes a much more difficult thrust. And so a drill like that, where your partner just holds up, oh, here, right? And you have to figure out what that angle is, how are you going to get there? So that's a super simple, again, partner drill. And most drills are better with a partner. You could do the same thing, though obviously it wouldn't change, but or you hang something with a hole in it that rotates around a little bit. And you could do the same thing, but it would be very random because it'd probably move in the wind or whatever's going on. So,
right. So we have another question from Tuhan Jack Latour, and that is, do you have a preferred method for sword sharpening / maintenance?
So I'm not a great sharpener. Actually, there is the Ken Onion Work Sharp has been a lifesaver for me. It's a fairly expensive sharpener, but it puts a great edge. You literally just follow the instructions, like, your edge is totally trashed, follow this prescription, and you go through it. And just from sort of day one, it's been easy. I've got a whole series of stones, like water stones and everything. And it's like, I can okay put an edge on, but that Work Sharp, it's an apple seed edge on. It's a curved in edge versus a straight edge, and it does it because it's essentially a very small slack blade, a slack belt sharpener. It's usually intended for knives, but I've put an edge on my for regularly as well.
Lamont, could you repeat that last sentence again? I think the wind kind of just took.
Okay. Yeah. So it uses a slack belt, which is a very it isn't a perfect edge. It's a belt sander. It's a very small belt sander, and it uses increasingly coarse to fine grits. But because the belt is running like this, and it depresses as you put this on, that edge on straight, it creates this curving on your edge. And as long as you make it symmetrical, then it makes a very fine edge that way, and easily replicable if you're a somewhat amateur sharpener like I am.
Wow. All right, we have one more question, and no pressure for this one. It's a preference question from Brother Ali, and it's, what is your favorite type of sword work, Japanese or Filipino? No pressure.
So I really, obviously I've been doing Filipino martial arts the most and the longest, but to me, I really like the Filipino. I think because it's really adaptable, and it's really hard to actually say anything encompassing about Filipino sword work, because there's a lot of different styles of it, even within the Philippines. You can sort of look at Japanese sword work, and there tends to be very broad similarities between it. But in the Philippines, it's really eclectic. So there's different people do different things. The street smooth guys are different from the PTD guys, and so but because of that, it provides us, at least in my experience, bikinis provided me with a really strong foundation to explore other arts. I also do, besides Japanese arts, I also do Scottish broadsword or or British military saber. And that is kind of the opposite of bikini in a lot of ways. But it's, for whatever reason, I don't find it as appealing. It's very, I enjoy it. I think it's a really good challenge, but it just organically, it doesn't fit together to me as well. And so Filipino martial arts is sort of seemed to be my home where I've come back to. Hey, kids, kind of loud. Go inside.
Oh,
we
we know that. We know all about that. You know, we're all here with the family. You know what I mean? It's like being in your living room and your youngin is, you know, in the backyard. And so we're family here. It's all good, man. And
speaking of which, you know, how has it been having to balance, you know, time, being at home? And, you know, if I'm not mistaken, do you have two or three young children?
Yeah.
Yeah, bless your heart. But you know, I'm sure in a certain way that could be like really, you know, cool because you get to really transfer for like, you know, what you've learned to your sons. You know, we have daughters. So even though in my mind, I'm like, no, they're going to train. They're still daughters. So I think we have a slight more flexibility, but how do you manage it?
Honestly, none of them really train actively. They're just getting whatever they can through osmosis. You know, the kids have spent a lot of time in the studio just with me, you know, whenever my wife sometimes travels for work, so she's gone, and they'll go to the studio with me. So just sort of through osmosis, they've been around. They've thrown on a fencing match. They sparred other adults and kids for fun, you know, and so they're getting it. But I've never really demanded that they do martial arts. I want to make it fun, and if they decide to do it, fantastic. But it's not going to be a requirement for me. But again, I try to do fun things with them on martial arts. We have BB guns for shooting. We'll go out and, you know, I brought out the sword yesterday. We cut a bunch of bottles. I want to make it something that they enjoy. Keegan is getting more and more into martial arts. Mostly, I think, beat up his older brother. He's like, show me some wrestling moves. So I think he'll jump into it. The youngest one, Thomas, who's 3, I'm convinced will be the warrior because he's going to spend his entire life being beaten up by his older brothers. And like, he's kind of got this younger brother ferocity thing going on. So, but Keegan is a lot. My oldest Xander has very little interest in it sort of long term. So, but yeah,
that's good parenting.
What's that?
I said that's good parenting right there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you know, Jen and I talk about it. Good parenting is being a good person, being a good leader. You know, being a good instructor. It's just good principles that you should have for everybody in the world.
Yeah.
The cutting, to bring it back to that real quick. Now you're in sparring matches. How much of this cutting technique to perfect the tatami mat is making its way into the live sparring match where now somebody's taking your head off, and talk about that transferability there.
So when you talk about, you know, training martial arts, for something as esoteric as sword work or even stick fighting, but sword work in particular, you know, all training is not real, right? All training is fundamentally not reality. And so we always make concessions to reality, especially with something like sword work. So you have to figure out what your fundamentals look like. You have to be able to test them. Are my fundamental aspects of using my sword, can I work them on a target? Are my techniques with this viable on a live target? And when you put that together, am I using my edge alignment when I'm sparring an opponent, right? So you have no single aspect of your training can be the answer, right? They have to become cohesive and whole, and that should come out when you're doing this live. If it isn't, there's a problem with your training, right? And so you've got to look at that. The guys that I've done blade sparring with, and clarify this as dull blades, have been really good and knowledgeable. And most of these guys come from HEMA backgrounds. Some of them are FMA backgrounds, but been really knowledgeable and good in their sparring about acknowledging, nope, I hit with a flat. You know, these guys, and one of the reasons that I got into HEMA was because of I wanted to train and spar with the blade. So if you look at my group now, not every day, but a decent aspect of our time, a lot of the senior instructors, we have the HEMA jackets, but we're using machete, basically dull down machetes, or again, I do military saber. But the point is, so that in our FMA practice, our Filipino martial arts practice, we can use steel or a simulated blade, and we know when we're hitting right. You know, and again, that comes back to cutting, that comes back to your fundamental practice, listening to that tatakaze. All of that should inform how you come out and spar. If it doesn't, that's a problem with the training, right? The sparring should be this culmination of all your training. And if it's not, if something's not coming out, that's a problem with the training. So you have to go back and readdress those fundamentals because it should come out. If it doesn't, that's a problem.
Right.
So,
Right. That's a great point. You know, I think I said this before in like another interview I was doing, but you're actually the first person I sparred outside of our school at the PTT account. And I think like Mandala Jason was the second person I sparred. But we were doing progression, so it was good because I had, of course, nerves and, you know, and so I'm also sparring the male. So I was really grateful for that. How important are the sparring progressions before you are doing actual sparring? You know, I think that doing stagnant drills are important to get flow and relaxation, but how important would you say are the progressions?
oh, so progression isn't, and I don't even view it as like before sparring. Hand hunting sparring is sparring. It's just a limited target sparring. You can do limited target sparring anywhere. You can make one person hand hunt, the other guy's head hunt, right? That's a training drill that forces different people out of maybe their comfort zone, or having to go to deeper targets where the other person's going to be, I'm defanging all day, right? I'm looking at the hand, the other person's like, I'm trying to knock you out, or you know, cut you in the head. But hand hunting is just one element of that progression. It's the one I start with because it's sort of, I don't have a sword coming at my face. If someone's a little timid that way, being whacked in the hand doesn't feel good. I usually start out with padded sticks and big gloves, and so there's not a big pain element to it, but okay, so I understand that I have to move the hand. I don't want to get that. And so I will start that. At the same time, you can get training scars if you do some of those too long. Like people will be like, aha, I'm going to fight you, and they're leading with their face because their hand is safe, right? And you don't want that to happen either. So I will take them through a progression of hand hunting for a couple of matches on their first day of sparring. I will throw people in the first, if they want to. I'm not going to throw someone in there who's not really willing to get in the ring. But it can be their second day of sparring just so they get the feel of, or second day of classes. Like they, usually our first, we have an open sparring night the first Monday of the month for our classes. And so anybody can show up. We get SCA fighters and everybody else come in. But if you're, one of our new people who started, maybe you jumped in for a test run class, are interested in sparring, or they got a little background, I'll just throw them in and say, here's a padded stick, here's some fencing mats, here's some gloves, go. And they will do that almost immediately. And they will suck at it because usually they don't have a background in it, but they get an idea of like, oh, well, okay, I'm getting hit on the hand all the time. How do I fix that? And so they get immediate feedback about, oh, well, I don't know what this looks like, even if they maybe have martial arts background, from something else. So that is, to me, really important. And we will go back to hand hunting all the time. Again, to me, if I can whack you on the hand, I might end that fight right there. So we will come back to that. That's not a beginner progression. That's just a regular progression that you should readdress those elements fairly regularly.
Yeah. So in the sparring match, first 10 seconds, what are you doing? What are you assessing? What are you looking for?
So usually I'm sort of getting a feel for what they're doing. So are they a rusher, right? So and usually I think, so somebody put it up, I'm going to recommend it. Benjamin Rittner, a lonely dog out of Germany or Switzerland, one of the senior dog brothers, he put out a thing about fighter types. Are you a fire fighter, fire, which is really aggressive? Are you earth, which is really solid and powerful, kind of using the natural elements? I classify under that criteria as a water fighter, which is a counter fighter. And so in sort of instinctively, I am very, let me see what you're doing, and I'm going to take advantage. I'll counter attack. So I tend to be a waiter a little bit that way. Is he coming? Is he hanging back? Even looking at his stances, he from above, his feet are kind of back on his heels, really solid and planted. So I'm looking for those things, and then usually just probably not 10 seconds in, probably about, if I don't feel like he's immediately going to run across and try to hit me, I'm going to start whacking at his hands. I'm going to start seeing what he does. Like, oh, okay, I'm gonna do a jab at his hands, and what does he do? Does he roof block? Does he pull back? Does he sort of pull back and then immediately rush forward? So that gives me sort of my feeling out period. So usually even the first 20 seconds of a match, I'm not trying to knock the person out.
Right.
I want to see what they're doing. That's going to set up how I'm going to attack.
Yeah,
Right.
very strategic.
Yeah, I noticed that you definitely are a mover. You move, and I know also it could be just off space of size and just wanting to, create mobility. But which one do you think is more advantageous? Someone who's just kind of marking and gradually moving based on what they see, or someone who is active, very active during the entire match?
It is easier to be, easier is not the right word. If you had to pick one thing to train something in a short period of time, and this is actually comes right back to PT again. If the whole tri-V, or this methodology that we're using was kind of reestablished when PT started training the Filipino military, and that's like, oh, I have a short period of time to train someone to get good fast. Well, good's not the right word, dangerous fast, right? And that's a very aggressive, and in part the very aggressive philosophy. I want to put this person on their heels, and then I'm going to take advantage of that. All of the initial tri-V striking patterns are set up very much as this aggressive forward pressure approach, and that is very true of PD in general. It is harder to be a counter fighter, in my opinion, especially with the sort of blade systems that we have that have very little or no hand protection on them. It is harder to be a counter fighter than it is to be an aggressive fighter. So if I had to pick one, I'd say be an aggressive fighter or train people to be aggressive earlier, especially if you have a limited amount of time to train. Learning how to read, oh, that's a number one coming in. I'm going to fade my body out. I'm going to, even block the stick. It's harder than I'm going to put you on the defensive, right? And I'm guessing I've got a good idea of where your defense is going to be. So it is generally beneficial, and that's true a lot of martial arts. It's generally beneficial to be that offensive fighter that way.
My what I love about the Pakiti footwork, it's very similar to like boxing. We see it with our students. I don't remember who that source was. You said that talked about kind of like fighting styles. Make sure you reference that next time. I want you to remind us of who that is. But a lot of times we see a lot of matches where they kind of one person gets to the center, that person becomes like the more fixed person, and then you got this person on the outskirts now trying to, and so we try to think about training from both of those positions, in terms of it. The sparring is not necessarily combat, but it can help you understand a scenario where if you do happen to have to be moving more, maybe not because somebody's sparring is holding the center, but that's the situation. What is the footwork? What are the patterns that's going to have you move around to get a more static opponent? And then if you do finding yourself for whatever reason having to be more static, I forgot the term that Jenna or you said, which you're more micro managing your movements. What is the movements? And so we try to identify those like two primary ways a lot of fights go. And then of course you have two people squaring off and two people moving around. And so then you kind of break it down from there. We try to put different scenarios in place where it's like, okay, you've been moving around a lot. Now you need to, not you, Lamont, but challenge yourself and work. What are your weaknesses in the sparring? Stay still a little bit more. Try to read, don't always strike. We got this thing, and I don't want to, all right, I'm going to give out a technique. When we put I cut out these attributes, only do uppercuts, always be the first to strike, follow every strike with a watique. You put them in a hat, one person pulls one, the other person pulls the other, and they have to stick to that for that 3-minute round. and then you have to go and assess, well, what do you think that person, what was the thing that who observing can identify that? And so, you know, I love this conversation because it's all ways to enhance different sparring techniques. I was going somewhere with that, I swear, and I totally lost my train of thought. All right, what are the different kind of weapons that you've sparred live with?
So unarmed, well, just you sort of increase in length, right? Unarmed, dagger, stick, you know, bolo, machete, the saber and broadsword, which are sort of longer, single weapon, but still longer. And then I haven't done a lot with, I haven't actually sparred katana, and I haven't really done longsword. Beyond that, sabat and spear are both things that, you know, that I've fought with. And so if I had to, oh yeah, I've done, yeah, absolutely. Didn't think about those. I think that's most of it. Punch daggers have been one. You know, at some point, a lot of these things sort of interact with each other, and they sort of, you know, just a different element of the same thing. Karambits, you know, whatever. There's only so many categories, right? I mean, there's one, you want to get a two-handed weapon, if it's not a two-handed sword, it's a two-handed forearm, you know, so it's a spear or an axe or something like that. But all of those kind of have broad similarities depending on how you use them.
Wow. I think Tuhan Jack kind of, I remember I was saying, who was the person that you cited that was talking about different fighting styles?
Right.
I see Tuhan Jack has mentioned Benjamin Rittner, and Tuhan Bill McGrath have had references to fighter styles and the elements. And Tuhan Jack is also citing Pendekar Eddie Jaffrey for how he diagnosed fighting styles.
Yeah, I've seen a lot. I mean, there's a lot of different people who will sort of categorize fighters. And I'm pretty certain I've seen a couple of different versions of this. Lonely Gods, and Renner. This is the most recent. So as long as I decided him because, you know, again, I saw it last week or something like that. But it also appealed to me because of this traditionalist, you know, element, categorization that way. So I think like Brother Martial Arts has like 7 different fighter types, sort of like, so they'll break down aggressive fighters a little bit more, you know, sort of aggressive crasher, you know, again, lots of different people have done different breakdowns on, you know, how people fight in an effort to sort of categorize people that way. So.
Right. I think we have like one last question for you, and that is from Marcilio from Brazil.
Brazil is in the house. Yes.
He wanted to ask, what do you think about training with different sounds and melodies and experiencing different rhythms and speeds in the footwork? I know for us, we definitely train to music, and I 100%
not all the time.
Not all the time, but
right.
I do think that if you can dance, then your ability to be able to be mobile in the match and find your own rhythm and awareness is going to be very essential.
Yes.
What do you think?
So I actually usually don't spar. Well, actually, Dog Brothers often spars the music. In our own studio, I don't, mostly because I want to be able to coach someone, you know, when sort of in the match. But honestly, when I'm going, like in a fight, in a very serious fight, I don't hear anybody. Like I know that I've been in Dog Brother matches that there's a drummer like right over there, and there's no connection to whatever the beat is, or if it is, it's totally subconscious. Like, you know, there's nothing auditory going in, sort of my connection that way. When I'm solo or in a, you know, when it's not a sparring situation, absolutely, I will use that all the time. I'd actually be curious for people who do spar to, if they're, you know, if you can actually take advantage of someone who actually uses beats. Do you actually follow beats, or is that part of your rhythm of like you're actually hitting the beat when you attack?
You asking me?
Just curious, and I don't, you know, I'd be curious because that's almost something like if someone is going to a beat, you know, one of the things to beat someone is you break it in. If you get an assessment of someone's time because of that beat, that's something you can take advantage. I don't know if you guys have seen it. Again, I don't do a lot of it.
That's right. You know, as someone, you know, the beat is timing, and you know, and if someone's moving in a predictable timing pattern, that's why they have to, you know, they have to go with the flow, then they have to break the flow. You know, that's why what we do with music, or even sounds like double sticks, the clacking of the patterns, you know, it's like you're going for one sound, okay, let's go for a different type of sound. So we're changing up rhythms and tempos and timing. And a lot of stuff, you know, Jen and I, we played capoeira, we still train it, a lot of movement to music, and we just find it helps you discover your own natural body's rhythms. And, you know, you're in a class and you're training drills that your instructor teaches you, but, you know, you have to learn your own body movement, and in a low risk kind of way. Dancing does help that. The carenza, stuff like that, that does help that. And so there should be more studies on it. I do believe that. There should be more studies on music and martial arts training and how they synergize. You think about different cultures playing drums and music before they would go to war and stuff like that. And that's worldwide. That's not specific to any culture.
Right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you know.
Everyone has a war song, I'm sure. And like Guru Rolando is saying, it's like, you know, when if you have that relationship with music, you become the music maker. You know, your body becomes the rhythm when you're in that.
That's right.
Not necessarily like a slave to some other rhythm, but you are now producing your own rhythmic patterns as you're you know,
that's right,
making it work. You know,
that's right. So for us specifically, no, we're not on the beat at all. If anything, I might lull you into a beat, and then when I feel like that's been sold, I'm switching the timing and I'm switching up the beat. And there's a lot of beautiful comments right now, just talking about music and training with music. And, you know, Tuhan Belton got a shout out for Morgan being the official OG B-boy of PTK. You know, hey, come to the Northeast though. No, let me stop. I've seen Tuhan Belton dance. He is an excellent dancer, excellent fighter. And Robert Daly is asking, how would you assess a person with size and quickness? I don't know if Robert means, how do you assess if they're quick with their size? But I guess it's a question about assessment.
Well, obviously it depends on the fighter. If you get a super athletic large guy, that's just a nightmare. I mean, that's just straight up nightmare. And I mean, in Dog Brothers, and I'm just using that as an example. Of course, it's everywhere, but you see it more because those are the most intense fights that I regularly get involved in, right? So all the other events I have are not as intense because there's just less chance of injury. And you'll see guys that are kind of big and slow, right? Those guys, I'm not saying I'm not worried about, I'm much less worried about large athletic guys, and they're a freaking nightmare. I mean, I've been very nicely not punted across the entire room, fighting some of the more bigger, faster guys. They're very politely didn't fully connect with that high kick, and but those guys, I mean, size matters. I mean, it does. It's a big freaking deal if you're in a fight. And so, as a smaller guy that way, that's gonna be a problem. I obviously try to use my advantage of, hopefully it's an advantage of timing and a little bit of speed to make up for lack of size. But man, a big guy can be a lot to deal with, and especially once if you want to include the grappling elements into your fight, if that's an opportunity. A lot of times we get in these blade rolls, or like, oh, we're going to be standing only. And a lot of our sort of standard sparring. As soon as you allow sort of the full gamut, that guy can keep his crash going to grappling and whatnot, then you have to be even a little bit more cautious, because that guy, it doesn't take anything for either A, to absorb the hit, or two, he gets one good block in and he's gonna rush you. If you're not used to dealing with that, you're probably going to wind up in a bad situation. So those sort of lessons are critically important. And so you've got to be able to deal with that size element, because me as a larger, smaller guy, or women as generally smaller, it's always going to be there as a self-defense element.
Right. And that's when destroying the presence of mind is just so crucial. like just knowing. I know for me, I always say I'm going to have that. It has to count. Like, you know, you can't waste movements. You can't waste, you know, you're too much time trying to assess something. There has to be that, you know, you have to buy yourself space and by destroying the presence of mind. I know for me, that's a big part, especially if I'm dealing with bigger guys. You know, I have about a foot taller sparring partner here. And I'm like, I'm never playing by the, it's never by the rules. I'm like, I'm going for his eyes. I'm going for, you know, below the waist. I'm going for, you know, a joint that I know is going to stop him.
She's got me in the eyes too, folks. That's when I proposed to her after that. I was like, yeah, this is the one for me. She got me.
So,
true story.
You know, I really do. I'm a firm believer in that. And I agree that that's always the thing. And when I'm, you know, teaching women, that's always their thing. Like, what happens when it's not enough? When you know, and, you know, that's when you have willpower and then a different kind of strategy. You know?
That's right. And Robert Daly felt like you did answer the question, and that's great. And Robert added, he said, I'm on beat because I'm from the Bronx. Yes, that's so true, brother. I got to up rock that'll kill you. And, you know, the thing is, you know, it's like you got to know the rules to break them. You know how to be on beat so that you could be off beat. You know, the thing about beats is about timing. In between every beat, there's a gap. If we could insert beats within beats, strikes within strikes, we're just getting faster with our timing. And then we have more control over our movements, our feints, so on and so forth. But I feel being from the Bronx and growing up in the environments that I did, it gave me, you know, it's a warrior training in and of itself, not just for the stereotype of the fighting, but for the movement, being in the culture, being free and expressing yourself, and being fearless in who you are in that regard. Yeah, and Rolando added straight to the eyes, straight to the knees, attack first. Mm-hmm. You know, in the combat mode, there's no time to waste. We don't play with the women in our group. We got a lot of big, strong males, very, very positive brothers, very, you know, good with their control, but they don't let up, because we want the women to know, and it's not just women, anybody to know, what is it like with someone bigger and stronger. Yeah.
Before we kind of close out, quick question: what are you working on right now?
Okay, so general fitness. So whenever the whole thing is over, we're actually hosting the Dog Brothers Gathering in Seattle in September. Or I'm hoping host it. So I'm trying to get my butt in shape for that. So that's my long-term goal, is in fighting shape for another gathering. And then actually, I've been working actually a lot of double stick. This is actually something I've been trying to get better at for a couple of years now. I'm actually trying to finish what's hopefully will become a PTA curriculum for double stick, for like a sort of training module for it beyond just Sinawali patterns and whatnot, but the Sinawali pattern suit fighting system. So hopefully get that whole package together, and hopefully we'll be able to present that sometime soon. But I've been really focusing on that for a couple of years, and am still trying to get better at it, trying to get the fights in to see does this stuff work. You know, and because I can't justify teaching it without doing it. And so last couple of years I've been doing lots of double stick fights in a number of formats, trying to get experience that way.
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome.
You got goals. Anything upcoming with your group, the Blackbird Training Group? You want to promote that?
Whenever we reopen.
I know. Look at me.
Yeah.
So, you know, you got Lamont. He's the head of the Blackbird Training Group. He competes in HEMA, Japanese tournaments, cutting tournaments, dog brother tournaments. He's also a top PTTA instructor, as well as a Gabai with their online program. I can't say enough about him. This has been a great experience, Lamont. Any final thoughts, sir, before we close this out?
No, not really. But yeah, thanks for having me on. This has been great.
Yeah, the future.
There you go.
That's right.
This is Keegan. Hi, pal.
That's right, Keegan. A great, and he's a father and a family man. Respect.
So
yeah.
I don't have a lot to add. If people are interested, there's we're up where I am in the Pacific Northwest. We have lots of different opportunities for weapon-based sparring if you're interested. obviously a lot of things are up in the air right now, given our current situation, but we were planning on hosting a single stick tournament in May. I know Morgan, who was on here, he was originally talking about his tournament at the end of June. In September, beat the crap out of cancer in November. So we got a lot of things that we do, over the course of these upcoming seasons, all of which, are probably in flux with the different dates, but it'll be something that we're interested in doing. And if you come up and compete, it's a great event to get experience.
That's right. Check out his website, blackbirdtraininggroup.com. Check out his YouTube channel with the same name, Blackbird Training Group. Support this brother. Keep us posted, Lamont, with your works. Thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in.
Yes, you're getting a lot of love and everyone's saying great interview and they wish you the best. And
Colleague Doug tuned in. He
Yes.
had signed in earlier. He also sends his love. We're trying to
Yes.
shout out everybody that tunes
Doug.
in.
right,
So thank you to Brother Doug.
right. And many blessings to you and your family. Hopefully you'll continue to stay safe and your youth will be strong.
Okay.
Thank you.
Stay safe out there, everybody. Wash your hands, cover your face, follow the protocols. Stay train every day. And we're closing out the show. Loyalty, wisdom, respect.
Life, health, and success.
Salute. Thank you all.